We are going to continue our conversation with Nikole Killion because, Nikole, we want to talk with you about Republican lawmakers. They are abandoning plans to form an America First caucus to champion, quote, Anglo-Saxon political traditions. Now, that's language directly from this document, first obtained by Punchbowl News. The platform also calls for infrastructure that reflects the value of European architecture.
Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar were reportedly behind the idea. The news spurred widespread criticism from within the party. Without mentioning Greene or Gosar by name, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy pushed back against the idea. In a tweet, he said the U.S. isn't built on identity, race, or religion, adding that the GOP is not the party of, quote, nativist dog whistles. Let's turn back to our Nikole Killion, CBS News congressional correspondent. Nikole, Congresswoman Greene claimed that this was an outside document that she never read, but her staff confirmed to CBS News over the weekend that the caucus platform would be announced to the public very soon. So what do we know about where this idea came from?
Well, we know that basically the objectives of this caucus were to champion some of the values of former President Trump championed during his presidency and to kind of carry on in his footsteps. That was also part of the language in this draft literature that, as you mentioned, was first reported by Punchbowl. And so it's unclear exactly who came up with the idea, but certainly it was something where Congresswoman Greene's name was attached to it, as well as Congressman Gosar. But what really rankled a lot of folks and really sparked a lot of outrage here on Capitol Hill was this language where this draft policy platform suggested that this would follow in Anglo-Saxon political traditions. And there was another component where they laid out their objectives on infrastructure, saying that they would work to reflect European architecture. And interestingly, not too long after that story came out, I bumped into Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert, who was reportedly invited to join this caucus. And so when I asked him about that language, if he supports that language, he suggested that he had not looked at it, that he would go back and review it, and that this was not supposed to be about race, that this was really supposed to be about this notion of America first, which again is something that the former president championed, but to make sure that America is in a stronger posture and that the priorities of America are dealt with first before we deal with other countries. That's how he kind of explained it to me and another reporter. But look, since this controversy unfolded, we have since seen not only Congressman Gohmert, but also Congresswoman Greene kind of backing off of this idea, suggesting that, at this point, it's unlikely to go forward. And we're still seeking clarity as to whether or not, she and others intend to move forward with this, or for now, they're standing down.
Well, Nikole, help us understand why both Republicans and Democrats were troubled by this language. And what does it tell us about the state of the GOP as we see pro-Trump lawmakers like Congresswoman Greene, Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, outraising more moderate counterparts?
Oh, well, certainly we saw a lot of criticism from both sides of the aisle, some of which you outlined from even Republican leader Kevin McCarthy over in the House. But again, I think certainly there is some concern that, some of that language was offensive to others, that this might be some type of caucus for whites only. I mean, if you want to be blunt about it. And so in the diverse world that we live in, that certainly was troubling to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. In terms of what it says in terms of the fundraising prowess, I think it's important to remember, separate from this caucus and the controversy surrounding it, that these are all individuals who remain very closely aligned with former President Trump. And I think it's important to remember that, this was a very close election that we came out of in 2020, where you still had more than 70 million people who supported the former president. So he does still have a very strong following. And consequently, those who support his ideas and his, platforms. Similarly, are also seeing a lot of support, but also it speaks to, the ability to harness, for instance, technology and social media. These are also people who are very active in that sense, which in turn also tends to have a result when it comes to fundraising. So a number of factors at play here, but it certainly does raise a broader conversation about where the Republican Party is headed and what its priorities are going forward.
And Nikole, we're also seeing Congresswoman Green go after Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters over comments that Waters made to protesters in the Minneapolis area region this weekend. What's going on there?
Oh, well, this is yet another controversy that, is emerging here as we start the week. And so how this all started is Congresswoman Waters from California. She went to Minnesota this past weekend and took part in a protest there in support of the family of Daunte Wright, who, again, was killed at the hands of police and has also been a source of controversy in that particular part of the country, given the environment right now with the Derek Chauvin trial, as far as the death of George Floyd, and that kind of in the backdrop there. But at any rate, there was this protest again to decry what had happened with respect to Mr. Wright, and so Congresswoman Waters was at that protest and told these protesters that they should be more confrontational, and so Congresswoman Green says that is encouraging violence, and therefore she strongly believes that Congresswoman Waters should be expelled from Congress. And so we are now hearing from Congresswoman Waters defending her statement, saying that she was not trying to incite violence, that her words are being twisted by Republicans, and that she considers herself a non-violent person, and that she is not afraid or intimidated by this attempt to try to expel her from Congress. Now, keep in mind, Congresswoman Green has not yet introduced this resolution to expel Congresswoman Waters, but she says that she does plan to do so. We still haven't heard yet in terms of timing when that could potentially happen. But for now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is defending Congresswoman Waters, saying that, when she said confrontational, that she strictly meant that they should be confrontational from a civil rights standpoint, not so much from a violent standpoint. So at this point, Waters does have the support of the House Speaker.
All right. Well, Nikole Killion, no shortage of stories on your beat on this Monday. Nikole, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
To be continued, as they say.